Saurabh, and you're listening to my favorite talk show, The Weekly Show with Aditya.
It's 10 hours.
This is episode 358 on the 30th of April 2021, and I welcome you to India's only radio and digital radio and TED Talk show. Let's start this beautiful Friday morning episodes by knowing what are the highlights on the horizon. We shall start with the song Out Twist Kare, then move on to the main theme of this morning's episode, that is 33%, and cap it off by reading from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. So let's start this beautiful Friday morning episode with this beautiful song. सुनो और गाओ और गौर से सुनो. अरे हाँ हूँ. और गाने में ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि दुनिया में भी कुछ करना हो तो सुनो मेरी बात, मानो मेरी बात. आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जाग उठा मौसम, हे आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जिंदगी है यही. आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जाग उठा मौसम, आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जिंदगी है यही. नाच उठी है जिंदगी ना ओ मेरी जान, छम छमा छम, छम छमा छम, हाँ ये हाँ. आओ 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 ट्विस्ट करें, जाग उठा मौसम, हे आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जिंदगी है यही. आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जाग उठा मौसम, आओ ट्विस्ट करें, जिंदगी है यही. परवानों दिल वालों आओ. Let's move on to the main theme of this morning's episode, that is 33%. 33% of this year is over, which means 120 out of 365 days are done. And the most important question is, has anything moved? Well, the way the events are happening, time seems to have been stalled as the world gets more and more pessimistic. It's all in the mind, it's more psychological than physiological. Yet, only con artists masquerading as experts recommend lockdowns, a sign of a moment of brain fate and a retrograde step. It hasn't worked, it will never ever work. Moving on. And this is most important. It is time that crowds are brought back in stadiums and theaters, full house, packed to the rafters. But we shall discuss this and more. Before that, let's take a short break. Welcome back after the break. In this context, take the example of the currently being executed Indian 20 over domestic competition. Of course, questions are being asked whether this domestic competition should go on because of certain events happening outside. Well, for me, they should continue. Yes, there are a lot of distractions which are distracting the players, which means a few players left the tournament for obvious reasons, and a few players are worried about reaching back home. Well, that's a concern, that is a concern, but moreover, should this tournament continue? Yes, looking at how other sports events are continuing, and despite the concerns, for me, each and every sporting event, even if it means without crowds and limited staff inside the stadium, each and every sporting tournament, whether it's private, public, or a public private combination, or events like the Olympic and World Championships, they should go on because it's a source of livelihood for these players. If these tournaments stop, the thing is, these sports athletes don't have a plan B as of right now. Their plan B is to become sports commentators, but if there is no sporting event, then there are no sports commentators being employed. So that plan B is also with respect to the conditions. Therefore, sporting events, despite whatever is happening around the world and all the concerns, should continue, because that's the only way we can get over the events and the pessimism that has grown more and more. As the famous quote goes, mind is of its own, it can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell. So it's all psychological rather than physiological. And the more this continues, the more it will become something that doesn't impress me. But before that, let's take a short break. Welcome back after the break. Now let's continue this beautiful episode forward by reading from H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. His glance flickered over our faces with a certain dull approval and then went round the warm and comfortable room. Then he spoke again, still as it were feeling his way among words. I'm going to wash and dress and then I'll come down and explain things. Save me some of that mutton, I'm starving for a bit of meat. He looked across the editor, who was a rare visitor, and he hoped he was all right. The editor began a question. Tell you presently, said the time traveler. I'm funny, but all right in a minute. He put down his glass and walked towards the staircase door. Again I remarked his lameness and the soft padding sound of his footfall, and standing up in my place, I saw his feet as he went out. He had nothing on them but a pair of tattered, blood stained socks. Then the door closed upon him. I had half a mind to follow till I remembered how he detested any fuss about himself. For a minute, perhaps my mind was wool gathering, then remarkable behavior of an eminent scientist. I heard the editor say, thinking after his want in headlines, and this brought my attention back to the bright dinner table. Time for a short break. Welcome back after the short break. What's the game? Said the journalist. Has he been doing the amateur cager? I don't follow. I met the eye of the psychologist and read my own interpretation in his face. I thought of the time traveler limping painfully upstairs. I didn't think anyone else had noticed his lameness. The first to recover completely from the surprise was the medical man who rang the bell. The time traveler hated to have servants waiting at dinner for a hot plate. At that, the editor turned to his knife and fork with a grunt, and the silent man followed suit. The dinner was resumed. Conversation was exclamatory for a little while, with gapes of wonderment, and then the editor got fervent in his curiosity. Does a friend eke out his modest income with a crossing, or has he his Nebuchadnezzar phases? He inquired. I feel assured it's this business of the time traveler, of the time machine, I said, and took up the psychologist's account of our previous meeting. The new guests were frankly incredulous. The editor raised objections. What was this traveling? A man couldn't cover himself with dust by rolling in a paradox, could he? And then, as the idea came home to him, he resorted to caricature. Hadn't they any clothes brushes in the future? The journalist too would not believe at any price and joined the editor in the easy work of heaping ridicule on the whole thing. They were both the new kind of journalist, very joyous, irreverent young men. But at this point, everything is opposite of joyous and irreverent. Let's take a short break. Welcome back after the break. Let's continue reading. Our special correspondent in the day after tomorrow reports that the journalist was saying, or rather shouting, when the time traveler came back. He was dressed in ordinary evening clothes, and nothing save his haggard look reminded of the change that had startled me. I say, said the editor hilariously, these chaps here say you have been traveling into the middle of next week. Tell us all about this little Roseberry, will you? What will you take for the lot? The time traveler came to the place reserved for him without a word. He smiled quietly in his old way. Where's my mutton? He said. What a treat it is to stick a fork into meat again. Story, cried the editor. Story be damned, said the time traveler. I want something to eat. I won't say a word until I get some peptone into my arteries. Thanks and the salt. One word, said I. Have you been time traveling? Wouldn't anyone wish of this to know what will happen next week? Yes, said the time traveler with his mouth full, nodding his head. I would give a shilling a line for a verbatim note, said the editor. The time traveler pushed his glass towards the silent man and rang it with his fingernails, at which the silent man, who had been staring at his face, started convulsively and poured him wine. The rest of the dinner was uncomfortable. For my own part, sudden questions kept on rising to my lips, and I dared say it was the same with the others. The journalist tried to relieve the tension by telling anecdotes of Hetty Potter. The time traveler devoted his attention to his dinner and displayed the appetite of a tramp. Well, it looks like we are all displaying appetites of tramps. The medical man smoked a cigarette and watched the time traveler through his eyelashes. The silent man seemed even more clumsy than usual and drank champagne with regularity and determination out of sheer nervousness. Let's take a short break. Welcome back after the break.
For more awesome content, tune in to the next episode of the weekly show with Bada.
This ends episode number 358 on the 30th of April 2021, the final episode of April 2021, with 33% of the year getting done.